everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein, and today's guest is writer Rachael Wesley. As an English teacher who has certainly dabbled with writing for publication, I've always been interested in speaking to writers who have pursued the art of writing as a living. I first became aware of Rachael's writing through Instagram, and the more I dug into her career and her social media posts, it seemed like we had a lot in common, but also some very different life experiences. A common thread, of course, though, is that we both love Phish. It was with this in mind that I asked her to appear on Attendance Bias, because when I saw that she described herself as an author of creative nonfiction, I needed to know more. As you'll hear in just a minute, I'm a huge fan of nonfiction. It's my favorite genre to read. So I wanted to know more about what she wrote in terms of creative nonfiction and how she takes the factual and turns it into a narrative. As you can tell, a lot of this conversation today focuses on reading, on books, and on writing. And sometimes it's fun, sometimes it gets a little bit deep, and about the difference between facts and truth, about a lot of different topics. But of course, we come back to center on Phish's performance of Simple from August 29th, 2014 at Dick's. This version features an amazing jam that bounces around to about 4 different genres for nearly 25 minutes. So let's join Rachael to talk about taking second chances in life, how Phish on Halloween cannot be missed, and how words aren't needed when your body speaks to you, as we discuss Phish's performance of Simple on August 29th, 2014 at Dick's in Broomfield, Colorado. Rachael, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thanks for being here.
Brian, I am so stoked to be here, so thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. I'm stoked to have you here for a number of reasons. First of which, I've never spoken to someone who describes themselves as a writer of creative nonfiction. So I'm excited to dig into that. I also am excited to talk about the jam that you chose, Simple, from August 29th, 2014 at Dick's. As you may or may not have heard from my previous episodes, I've never been to Dick's. So it's this forever mystery box of excitement for me. So the more angles I hear about it, the better. And I listened to this jam for the first time and it blew me away. So there's a lot to dig into here. And to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer. You say on your website that you are a writer of creative nonfiction. Before I ask you what that means, what is your website? Where can people find your writing first?
For right now, the best place to find me is on Instagram. You could find me under Rachael Wesley Writes, and my name is spelled Rachael. My parents didn't give me a middle name, but they gave me that extra A to help me stick out. So yeah, for right now, find me on Instagram. Thank you.
Sure. As a middle school teacher, I've seen Rachael spelled about a trillion different ways. As you were saying that, I pictured AEEA. Wise somewhere in there, 2 L's at some point. So just to make sure, so it's Rachael Wesley Writes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. And as I mentioned earlier, you describe yourself as a writer of creative nonfiction. I think that most people wouldn't put those genres together. They seem almost like an oxymoron where creative writing, at least when I was in school, was different than nonfiction. So what does your writing look and sound like?
Yeah, I would love to explain. And I love how you say oxymoron, because I've been thinking a lot about the human condition and what a big contradiction humans are. So we'll throw in that creative nonfiction to that mix. I'll throw a question at you. When you think nonfiction, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
For me, it's biographies or autobiographies. Well, I don't know. An autobiography could be creative, of course, because there's an author's intent behind it. But to me, biographies are nonfiction, or textbooks sometimes are nonfiction as a middle school teacher.
Yeah, right. So I think a lot of people, when you hear nonfiction, you think that expository, written to explain, to give information. But for me, as a creative nonfiction writer, I think more of a narrative or a memoir. So think of authors like Frank McCourt, who wrote Angela's Ashes, or Tony Bourdain when he did Kitchen Confidential. It's a narrative that kind of reads like a fiction story, but it's true. And then you have to think about when you're writing these lengthy pieces, a lot of times as a creative nonfiction author, I have to take several events and put them into one event just for the flow of the story. Or I haven't done this, but a lot of memoir writers have, where you create a composite character from several different people. And again, just to help with the flow of your story. Then you think about dialogue. Some of my stories I write are from 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember a conversation in verbatim from yesterday. So how do you get exactly what you talked about 10, 15 years ago? So you create dialogue to not just help with the narrative and the flow of the story, but to honor that moment in time, even though it's not going to be exactly what was said.
So it's almost more about truth than facts.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I've never thought of that before, Brian. Thank you.
Well, maybe you could move into philosophical fiction, huh? Or philosophical nonfiction, right? It's not about facts. It's about truth. It's really what it made you feel, or what, as opposed to what actually happened. Like you mentioned, composite characters.
100%. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a genre unto itself, but my favorite are oral histories, are when you get the history of something that happened. Like a couple of years ago, that SNL book, Saturday Night Live, came out, and it was just everyone's stories from like 13 or 14 different sources. Or there's one about the history of ESPN called, I think it's called Those Guys Have All the Fun. And there's no narration except for small excerpts to give context, to frame the quotes, where you get like who had the first ideas for ESPN. And then you get like 3 or 4 guys who were all in the room at the same time, but they each recollect it a little bit differently. And it's a gigantic book. It goes all the way for like 30 years. And those are my favorites, because you have one side, you have the other side, and the truth somewhere in the middle. And that's where I get into creative nonfiction.
Yeah, and that's a huge component of it too. Especially, again, if I'm writing about real life, or anyone's writing about real life, you're writing from your perspective, your version of how it happened. Someone else might have a completely different experience from it, a memory from it. So that goes along the same exact lines.
Well, who are some of your favorite authors? I know you mentioned Frank McCourt a minute ago. Are your favorite authors, your favorite literature in that same genre, or do you have other genres that you enjoy?
I feel like I could probably talk for an hour about
You have 1 minute.
So, okay, I do love memoirs or creative nonfiction from like the unknown. I like to say
from the unknown.
Like, why do famous people get to tell their story? I always go back, and I keep his book right near me, but Tony Bourdain, when he wrote Kitchen Confidential in the early 2000s, he was unknown at the time. Same thing with Wild, Cheryl Strayed. When she wrote Wild at the time, again, she wasn't known. Eat, Pray, Love is another one that comes to mind. So, fact is stranger than fiction. And I think everyone has a story in them, and everyone has a story inside of them. It's just getting that story out. I don't think it should just belong to the celebrity. I was gonna just to throw in, I like back to different books I read. I mean,
yeah,
I love historical fiction. As a teacher, you probably get really into historical fiction. I love women's fiction. I love contemporary fiction. 2021 found me really expanding my palette of what I'm reading, and I was diving into like thrillers, horror stories, I should say. I was even reading like your quintessential romance novels. So I've been really trying. I've not really dove into fantasy or science fiction yet. I imagine that'll be coming soon. But yeah, I like to read a little bit of everything.
Well, what started you on the road to becoming a writer? At what point, or maybe it didn't even happen this way, but at what point did you decide writing is my heart? Writing is what I love to do most.
Christopher Pike. I don't know if you're familiar with him or read him as a tween or teen.
I know his name.
It goes back further than that. My love of writing kind of was born at the same time I learned to read. Since I was a little one, I was always creating silly stories, poetry. I remember I wrote my 8th grade Christmas play. Like anytime I could sit down and write something, that's what I was doing if I wasn't reading. But when I was a tween, 11 or 12, I was obsessed with this YA horror novelist, Christopher Pike. And he inspired me to write, I hand wrote a story called The Nightmare Murders that
Good
might
title.
be hanging. You could imagine what it was, infer what it was about based on that title. But yeah, I hand wrote it in between the summer, between my 7th and 8th grade year. Attempted to type it out on my grandmother's typewriter. I don't think I ever finished that project, and it might be stashed at my parents' house somewhere. But that love of writing, followed me into high school. And college, I switched majors a couple times. I was a journalism major at one point. But I wanted to do something a little bit more, I don't want to say exciting, but get a little bit more creative with my writing. And even though I kind of didn't know what to do with it afterwards, I ended up ultimately deciding on an English major.
Me too.
And we both ended up as teachers, right?
Well, I wanted to be a journalism major, but I just stuck with English with the intent to go into journalism. And then I graduated college in 2004. Turns out in 2004, a lot of publications weren't hiring. They were, in fact, going right out of business. And they said, you could pitch us something and we might be able to pay you. And I'm like, I have no idea how to pitch something. Like, none of my classes told me how to get hired as a writer. They just told me how to write. So that's how I ended up in education, where I went to writing, and now I'm here. Yeah.
Well, so I graduated in 2004. And at the time I was like, I have Peter Pan syndrome.
That's why we go to Phish concerts.
Yeah, right. It was very apparent in 2004 how deep my Peter Pan syndrome went. I hung out in my college town for a couple extra years. I wasn't ready to leave that lifestyle. Kind of thinking about, what do I want to do next? There was thought of maybe going to get my MFA. Thought of going to law school. I actually ended up in 2006 coming here to Denver for the summer and doing, it was called the Publishing Institute through the University of Denver. And it was a 4 or 6 week program that taught you the ins and outs of the publishing industry. So editing, marketing, selling books. And so then I got this idea in my head, maybe I'll work in the publishing industry and write on the side. But life happens. And in 2007, I ended up getting this random email from a school in South Korea asking me if I wanted to go teach English. And being a lifelong reader and obsessed with Tony Bourdain, I didn't jump at the chance to go teach, but I jumped at the chance of getting to go live in another country, immerse myself in another culture. And I did that for 2 years. And while I was there teaching, I fell in love with it. I worked with 3, 4, 5-year-olds, loved working with the little ones. They were just so fun. And I just found teaching to be really rewarding. In 2018, I was working in Title I classrooms, and it took a toll on my mental health. I was ready to leave education. And then I found I could teach online. So that's what I do now. I work for a hybrid high school, teaching online, but I go into an office a couple days a week to work with students one-on-one. So it still allows me to work with students suffering from a lot of trauma, which is like my heart and my passion in the realm of education.
I don't mean to tease it, but business must be booming right now.
Oh.
Between hybrid learning and dealing with trauma, I think we got that in spades in education right now.
That's not an hour-long podcast. That is a year-long.
That's a Ken Burns series podcast.
So I'm going from working 60 plus hours a week in the classroom and then dealing with a lot of mental health stress in my own personal life to now working a 40-hour work week, no more than a 40-hour work week. And I suddenly found myself with all this extra time back in my life. And then after I was able to get more of a baseline from that flare up in my mental health, I was like, life's too short. I've always wanted to write. Let's get back into it. So that's my long story longer of my writing path, Brian.
Are there any topics that get your interest? Like, is there any trend when you say you like to write creative nonfiction and create some sort of memoir or narrative? If someone in 50 years looked at your oeuvre would there be any pattern like, oh, Rachael Wesley, she likes to write about blank as far as the topic goes, or maybe even a theme?
Oh, I like that. Humanity.
Could it be any more specific?
Okay. I'm trying to think of the most succinct way to say this. I like to be transparent. Well, I write about my own life, and I like to be really transparent about situations, actions, things I've dealt with. To one, break down various stigmas and things. And to two, to just talk about things and get them out into the open so that we can break stigmas and help people feel more comfortable about things. So, I've talked about my mental health a little bit in these 20 minutes we've been talking. I've suffered from anxiety, depression, and hypochondria my entire life. And there have been certain periods of my life where it's absolutely taken over all aspects of it. So I write a lot about that. I think it's just super important. Less serious, I like to write about the wonderful synchronicity of life, those signs from the universe, these coincidences that happen or strange things that I think help show you like, hey, this is where you're meant to be. This is meant to happen.
It's not a coincidence that we're talking about Phish today, because
exactly.
In my own experience, and I've done this podcast and met a lot of fans, it's not unique to me by a long shot. There are some things that only could happen at a Phish show, that they are meant to be. I could start another podcast about whether or not God exists or spirituality, but man, if there is a God, he or she is working at Phish.
Well, I'm not a religious person. I'm a recovering Catholic. But, I write about this all the time, is that I never feel so connected. Like, I just understand if I'm sober or not at shows like that. It's palpable, like how strong that connection is when you're at a show. And oh my gosh, it's so strong.
I wanted to ask you for some recommendations because I'm a big fan of nonfiction. And I think I'm a little outdated because a lot of my favorite books, some that will stick with me forever. I love On Writing, Stephen King's memoir about writing. Have you ever read that one?
I have it on loan from a friend on my bookshelf, and I've not read it yet. My to-be-read pile is huge. Yeah, that's what I hear.
Put that to the top. So On Writing. I love Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, which is what Goodfellas is based on. It's the Goodfellas book, basically. And it reads like Goodfellas. You could almost picture it moving as fast as the film. It's just a big bolt of energy in about 300 pages. I'm a native New Yorker, and I've lived in New York my entire life. So The Power Broker by Robert Caro. If you're writing that one down, you might want to do some forearm workouts because it's like 1,300 pages. Oh. The recommended way to read it is to get the crappiest used paperback you can, rip it into thirds, and then just read it a third at a time. And if you like it, then buy one to keep on your bookshelf. It's fascinating. But those books were all, I think the most recent one was published in like 1985. So can you give me, if you had to pick three that have been published in the 21st century, let's say since 2000, 3 creative nonfiction books, only 3, what would you recommend?
Do they have to be creative nonfiction?
I like nonfiction. Let's keep it that way.
Okay. I read this memoir last summer that I think is a great example of like these amazing books written by unknown people. It's called The Light Years by Chris Rush. And it's a coming of age novel that takes place in the late 60s throughout the 70s about this young kid who really got into the drug scene at the time. It was pretty crazy. And a huge example of fact being stranger than fiction.
I've also read Krakauer. I know you brought up Krakauer. So I did love Under the Banner. I did love Under the Banner of Heaven.
I'm rereading that right now, actually.
Fabulous. Yeah, and the one about, what's his name? Chris Candless? Is that his name?
Oh, yeah. Into the
Wild. Yeah. So I like those two.
Into Thin Air. Into Thin Air is like on your seat adventure.
Oh, that's about the people who have climbed Everest, right?
Yeah.
I've read that one too.
Okay. So good. So good. I've got actually a John Krakauer on loan from the library, and I'm looking at Missoula it's about the university in Montana just brushing rape cases under the
Oh my
carpet.
goodness. Okay.
Yeah. So not light reading.
Yeah, I might have to throw up before I go to bed after reading that.
Yeah. But I'm going to go a little off just because I've been telling everyone to read this book, but Station 11.
Okay.
It's a limited series on HBO right now. It was probably my favorite read I read in 2020. It's dystopian, end of the world. And it's just about what happens to humanity after the world's wiped out by a massive flu. So timely, it's right now it's a HBO limited series, but the series is going far off script from the book. So you could watch the series and still read the book and not know what to expect.
All right. I got them. I got those recs. To wrap this all up, this segment about getting to know you.
Yeah.
You told me as we were discussing about this show that you have a Phish related book in the works.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Give us a teaser.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Sure. I can't wait.
This has been such a baby of mine. And here, I'll show you because this just came in the mail. I'm about to dive in for my last. That's me. This is me back in, this is at MPP in 2011, I think.
So for those of you who can't see, that's everyone listening. Rachel is showing me a manuscript. It's called Second Set Chances by Rachael Wesley, and a picture of her in it's in black and white, but what I guess is a sundress, right? With a really fun hat, sunglasses, and a ginormous smile, which of course is the MPP lawn because everyone feels that way when we're there. So what's inside those pages?
So, oh my gosh, it's so exciting for me. I'm so happy you're giving me the opportunity to talk about this. I've been working on it since August of 2019. I think I started it a couple weeks before the Dix run that year. I think, at least to me, and I hope this comes across to my readers, that it's going to read like a work of scripted women's fiction. Between 2009 and 2013, I didn't get to see Phish a whole lot. I was trying to count on my hands how many times, and I saw them maybe 15 times in those 4 years, because my life at the time wasn't super conducive to getting to shows. I was spending my time moving back and forth between my hometown in Northeast Pennsylvania or living and teaching in Seoul. And then when I was back here in the States, I was busy with school and I was trying to take school seriously for the first time. My husband, he had accompanied me to a couple of shows, but he wasn't really into it. I know there's a lot of people out there who do have partners who aren't into the scene and it works for them. But for me, it was something I really wanted to share the experience with my partner. And because he didn't enjoy it, I really didn't go out of my way to go see shows. I was trying to be a quote unquote wife. So when Second Set Chance opens, it's July 2013. And I've just newly returned to Pennsylvania from my final year of living and teaching in Seoul. My husband and I are a month away from moving to Las Vegas. He and I really wanted to leave my tiny northeastern Pennsylvania hometown and plant some roots elsewhere, and really begin a life, establish ourselves within a community, start our careers, buy a house, all of those quote unquote, again, like American dream ideas. So when the book opens, I'm a month away from moving to Las Vegas. But before I move, one of my closest friends at the time, Abby, we want to have this final hurrah weekend before moving. So we decide to go to 3 nights back and do some camping. Abby and I, as we're driving up to Saratoga Springs, she starts to question me about the state of my marriage. My husband and I were dealing with some marital discord. I'm looking at this move to Vegas as being like a reset button for our marriage, and we could start again. And I'm thinking, once we plant these roots and establish ourselves in a community, things will start to get better. But Abby's questioning me. What's going on? You guys seem off. Are you happy? I brush her off. Everything's fine. Because as soon as I'm done telling Abby, everything's fine, Abby, we're good. Love my husband, I take off my wedding ring. Oof. And I remember this conversation. I could picture where we were, and I tell Abby, hey, this is my final hurrah before I move. I'm going to pretend I'm single this weekend just so I could get some innocent flirtation and have a little bit of fun. Like, what is some flirting going to do? Prior to night one, before we go into the show, I eat like the smallest amount of mushroom shake. But halfway into first set, I have a panic attack. I am not in a good headspace, like at all. And I don't let Abby know. I don't let anyone know. I just try to dance it out. Like I remember Bowie coming on to end the set, and I'm like, oh shit, this song's going to be over. I need to get all this energy out. I don't know what to do with myself. Bowie ends the set. Abby and I are walking through the lawn. We're trying to set ourselves up in a different spot. Then I hear someone calling my name. And I look up and I don't recognize this person. And it takes me a couple moments to realize who it is. And when I do, I'm astonished. It's an old college buddy, an old crush of mine that I hadn't seen in 8 or 9 years. And we just randomly run into each other at set break. So that happens in the first 2 chapters of the book. So the rest of the book takes off from there.
It's at a juncture, a crossroads in your life.
Yes.
Phish is coming back to you, so something familiar and your friend. And then something from the somewhat recent past or a distant past, maybe. I would have to read it to keep track of the timeline. And that kind of is a springboard to what I imagine is some sort of bigger decision on the horizon.
I really throw myself out in this book. I'm super transparent. It was a huge transitionary period for me. At this time in my life, I was not happy with where I was, but I felt super trapped by all of my decisions. And I have to stay in this path right now because I chose this, and I know so many people are in that similar position. I'm trapped because of my decisions. And I really want people to know it's never too late to change things. It won't be easy, but you can.
So, Rachel, we know about creative nonfiction. We know about your history as a writer. Let's hear about you as a fan with the attendance bias lightning round. You ready?
Ready.
Attendance bias lightning round.
Rachel, when was your first Phish show?
The Hampton Run in 2003 when they came back.
Which show? Because I think they played 3 shows at Hampton.
They did. Year. Okay. So I only had tickets to night 2. We went down for the entire weekend, ended up getting tickets for night 1 as well. Tried our hardest to get tickets for night 3. Just didn't happen.
What's your most recent Phish show?
Vegas Run.
The all 4?
Yeah.
What'd you think of Sci-Fi Soldier? I still haven't gotten my head wrapped around it yet.
Being there for Casbah, I mean, it's sometimes always so hard to be in the moment with new Phish. And I remember for Casbah not loving it when I first heard it, but ending up ultimately absolutely loving Casbah. So knowing that when we went into Sci-Fi Soldiers, I try to have more of an open mind, and it worked. I enjoyed it in the moment. Were you at that run, Brian?
No, I haven't seen Phish on Halloween since 2013, since the wingsuit. Once they've gone to Vegas, it's become a really difficult thing for me to pull off because as a teacher, it's kind of frowned upon to take a Friday and a Monday. So if it's a weekend, it's a little tough. It's tough to fly out to the West Coast from New York for a weekend. Anyway, it's kind of a big time investment. And we get so many days off in the fall, because on Long Island, we get a lot of the Jewish holidays off as well. And so I don't always feel comfortable taking recreational days off in the fall. I try to save them for the spring.
Solidarity. No, I get that. In a previous life, when I worked for the public schools, I would only get so much time off. But with the school I'm at now, they give a little bit more time off. So
Nice.
I can be flexible. Yeah.
But I hit the New Year's run every year.
And that's something, since I've moved this way, I cannot make happen a lot. I don't think I've done a New Year's show since 2015 or 2016.
So we're taking each other's places.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to throw you a curveball here, okay? I don't know if... okay, you might regret it.
No.
So your favorite indoor and outdoor venue, but MSG and the George don't count.
Favorite indoor, take out the garden. That is a curveball. man, I might be sitting here thinking for 10 minutes.
You can pass.
Yeah, we'll have to come back.
Okay, all right. So your favorite outdoor venue aside from the Gorge?
There's something, I've only seen a couple shows at the Sleep Train, but there's something about the Sleep Train I just love. I've got great memories from those shows I've been at, and then just that cool ocean breeze. And then the Sleep Train in 2014 was my first West Coast Phish. I don't know if it's high energy or super aggressive East Coast Phish, but I remember being at that show and I was just like, everybody's just so chilled and laid back. And I didn't like it at the time. I wanted that energy. I wanted that aggression, but I've really adapted to it.
What is your favorite post-show snack?
It's a pasta dish called cacio e pepe. I am pronouncing that incorrectly and doing my Italian heritage a disservice, but it is super cheesy, peppery pasta that is just the perfect nightcap.
How does that come up? Because I don't know any place that's open that has that on the menu after a Phish show.
It happens in my kitchen.
Fair enough. Good answer. So Hotel Wesley has it open.
Yeah.
There's actually a great restaurant in Manhattan called Cacio de Pepe that's their signature dish, and they come around with this gigantic cheese wheel, and they whip up the pasta inside the cheese wheel and take it out and place it. Yeah, oh yes.
Oh,
it's fabulous.
I need to go there for my next non-Phish New York trip then.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're open after the show, but if they are, give me a call. I'll meet you there. And finally, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
All right. So in recent memory, this happened at the Gorge this past year. I didn't see it, but it was a story by one of my camping companions. We were with a very large crew, and I believe his name was Matt. This is my first time meeting him. Yes, Matt. Matt is a father to two young kids. He had like dad's weekend off. His wife stayed home with the kids, and man, he went for it. I don't know how much sleep he got that weekend, but when we were packing up the next day, he entertained everyone with the story about how, as it was approaching sunrise, he went into the porta pot, and he doesn't know how long he was in there. When he woke up, he was still in the porta pot.
Wait, when he woke up, so he fell asleep.
So he passed out in the porta-john.
Yeah.
And he was in there for so long that his feet fell asleep.
Oh,
and he had to wait to regain feeling in his feet to exit. So I didn't see it, but that's my favorite recent weird story.
If you pass out in a porta-john and your feet fall asleep, God bless if that's the only thing that goes wrong.
I'm sure he came home and slept for a week.
I hope he decontaminated for a week also.
When was this show played?
So today's show was in August 2014. Let's talk a bit about the summer tour of that year. So summer 2014 was pretty much the Fuego tour. And every single venue, it seemed, got a Fuego. Whether or not that's statistically true, that's certainly how it felt. There we go again with creative nonfiction. It might not be factual. Right, the Oprah meme.
Yeah, I love that.
It may not be factual, but it's truthful. That every that every venue got a Fuego. And so Fuego was played. Actually, I did look it up. It was played at 13 shows out of 25. So they might not have done 2 or more night runs at every venue, but figure on average, it was played at every place that they stopped. And the set lists were just littered with lots of Wingsuit or Fuego songs. So Waiting All Night, Wingsuit, The Line, 555, Winter Queen. A lot of these songs that have kind of not fallen off, but they don't show up that often anymore. But Fuego still does. 555 is still pretty common, especially in the first set. But a lot of them haven't stuck around. For me personally, summer 2014 wasn't that memorable. I saw 2 shows at the Man and 2 out of 3 nights at Randall's Island. I think that's it. I didn't see a lot.
Shows. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the shows that I remember hearing about the Tweezer Fest from Merriweather Post, which there's an episode with the guys from Weekend Wook, which is a YouTube channel that they were, or one of them was on to talk about that show at Merriweather. The Type 2 Wombat and the Wedge, which were at Northerly Island in Chicago. There's a 28-minute chalk dust torture on the third night of Randall's Island that blew me and everyone else away. And to go to your show today, 2014 was the fourth time that the band played their Dicks blowout, their end of the year, end of summer blowout. The first set of this show spelled out Lushington, and then they played Ha 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 as a goof, right? To take the piss out of what would have been probably the greatest bust out of all time. And the first set closed with Susie Greenberg, and it had Natalie Cressman and Jen Hartswick came on. So it sounds like a fantastic show. What memories do you have of it?
So 2014 was my second year teaching for my school district at the time. It's the beginning of the year. You can't take the time off, right?
Right.
So I got Monday off with it being Labor Day, but I just couldn't get Friday off. So I had to hop on a plane right after work. And the same thing happened to me in 2013. I remember pulling up to the venue, but hearing Gaiuti playing. So as I'm rushing to get into the venue, I think I missed the line, no big deal, right? To get established with my Phish family on the floor, page side, and I'm getting settled, just in time for them to play No Quarter. And yes, I mean, I love Zeppelin so much. For a long time, they were my number 2 band in high school after the Beatles, which was saying a lot because I was obsessed with the Beatles in high school. And I love Zeppelin so much. So to be there 4 1/4, and I love Page so much. It was just setting, it was perfect, and then we got that great set ending with Susie. So awesome. And then set break comes, and I'm finally able to talk and catch up with all my loved ones. When set 2 started, we all just put a little extra pep in our step for Back on the Train. And then Simple begins, and I've always loved Simple. Always, like that intro, and it's just so energetic, and it gets me moving so much. Again, just like my memories, like I have this vivid memory of the song starting and someone asking me, because you can always count on me to be a bathroom buddy, because I always have to pee. But somebody asked me, "Hey, do you want to go to the bathroom?" And I was like, "No, Simple just started. Leave me alone." And I was not expecting this jam. So,
is this why you have attendance bias for this? Of all the shows you've seen, why you picked this one?
And it's just the memories of this time in my life. 2014 was it was a super transitionary period for me. Because of what I write about in Second Set Chances, I was starting to make movements to living a more genuine and fulfilling life for me. But it was I was in such a period of transition. I was living in Las Vegas and thousands of miles away from all of my loved ones, my family, my friends. It was a very lonely existence for me. I'm super outgoing and gregarious, and I thrive on human connection. And I just wasn't getting it in Las Vegas. So, to be able to have this respite at that time in my life, to leave Vegas, to meet all of my loved ones in Denver and have that time with it, it filled that bank, so that even when I got back to Vegas, I listened to this run constantly just to bring me back to this time in my life and to fill me when I needed it. But it was always this Simple that I kept coming back to.
As you mentioned, Simple comes right out of Back on the Train, and it's song number 3, I think, right? 46 Days begins the set. Yeah. And then Back on the Train. The one thing I noticed right away, and the recording of this on Phish.in is beautiful. So thank you to the tapers. Thank a taper today. That Page is really high in the mix, and he is just pounding the piano. I noticed that right away.
I mean, I've said it before. Page is my man. My ears, my knees, my hips, my feet, they will automatically tune in on him. So yeah, I just love when he comes through loud and clear on the recording.
And the song itself is over after about 4 minutes. And once the jam begins, it's very soft and sedate. And again, Paige and Trey are co-piloting. They're co-piloting it. Neither is taking the lead. And they're both kind of staying close. And I wrote true to the simple melody. The song structure is still the same, but they're kind of weaving in and out of one another, like a lanyard from summer camp, where you're just kind of like going in different ways, but you're creating this kind of solid center. It sounds like a lot of other simples, but that's a good thing.
I mean, I could hear it in my head. There's this composed section of the song to me is just always so soothing and calming. And this version, especially, and I think because you could hear Paige so loud and clear, it just comes through like a lullaby for me.
Aww.
It's so calming.
And then around 7 minutes, things get a bit feisty. They start to leave simple, or the progression of it, and Fishman steps forward, right? His drum beat changes. He gives a little bit of a faster or a little more syncopated rhythm. And he steps forward on the one, and then Trey moves down to a minor key. He turns into rhythm guitar. And to me, this is where my ears said, all right, this is probably where she picked this jam. I didn't know you yet, right? We were just texting. And I said, but you know what? Just from what I've learned about her, I think this is really where it turned her head on.
I mean, it's, well, like with any jam, it completely starts to go away from the song. I love this, it's probably about 2 or 3 minutes, right? Where they're just, the four of them are just creating this lovely little rhythm section. It gets my body moving. I mean, there's nothing really special about it, nothing that sticks out.
I disagree.
But I don't know, my body just wants to respond to it. Like, I don't have a musical background. I have no musical acumen. I don't play an instrument. I can't sing to save my life. I don't know chords. I don't know keys. I just know what my ears, my brain, and my body responds to. Like, I know what I like. And yeah, I mean, I love this little section. I mean, I love the whole song, but this little section here.
about halfway through, things change a lot. I don't just mean in terms of what chords are being played or the beat. The whole tone of the jam changes. To me, it sounded like arena rock. If you've ever seen Almost Famous, I pictured this is around 10 minutes, a little bit earlier than 10 minutes. This is like what Stillwater would play if they were a jam band. And who's to say they're not? We only saw them a little bit. But Trey strikes out on his own, and he really starts playing this incredible riff that to me really sounds like, you mentioned Led Zeppelin before and how much love you have for them. It's in that vein, even though it doesn't exactly sound like Led Zeppelin.
And again, we're going to talk about synchronicity. This has nothing to do with the sound, but just synchronicity of life. I haven't thought about Almost Famous in years, and I love that you say that, because just last week I was talking with somebody about that movie. Arena rock is a great way to describe this, and then what it's going to lead up into.
Well, you tell us, what does it lead up into?
All right, this is going to sound silly. Maybe so, maybe not. There's like a 3-second burst from Trey that happens around the 13:45, 13:47 mark. And it's just the smallest little burst, but oh man, my ears just rejoice to this little bit. It's almost as if Trey's giving us a call to action. I would love to hear what you have to say just about that little bit.
Well, I wrote it a little bit earlier than what you said. You said around 13:45. I started my next note at 12:45. So consider it inclusive. It still counts, right? I wrote soaring stuff that they're owning the venue. And my first association was, for this podcast in the last couple of months, I've been listening to a lot of early 90s Phish. And then when I started listening to earlier Phish in the early 90s, it really became clear why rock critics and music fans would describe them as goofy and nerd rock, kind of in the vein of They Might Be Giants, where you had to kind of do a little work to appreciate Phish. A lot of people now, a lot of jaded fans like me, and older than me, or a couple years younger than me, they always say that Phish now couldn't play the same as they could back in the 90s. And that is probably true. I do subscribe to that. But when I heard this point, the part you're talking about around 13 and a half or 12 and a half minutes in, I would argue the opposite, where Phish in 1994 couldn't play like this, that you need that patience, you need that weight, you need that control. and that set of dynamics and knowing each other, that familiarity as a group, they couldn't play to a stadium with this beautiful music that touches the hearts of everyone listening.
I love that. But I mean, time brings about the wisdom in knowing, right? So
For those who want to learn.
I have not been listening to a lot of early Phish, so I don't have that to compare it to. I guess I'm going to have to once we conclude our discussion here. But I do like that idea of it's the same band, but they've evolved. They're different, right?
It's almost completely different music.
Yeah.
If you look at it a certain way. And then my next note is a couple minutes late. Well, I felt like with this jam, I was adding notes about a minute spliced apart. This jam moves.
Yeah.
This jam is hard to pin down. So at about 15 minutes, all of a sudden, they're closer to like 97, the cow funk. Like I hear a little bit of Simple still there, but it's not. Page does a little bit of a tease of Simple. And then he's like, hey guys, just remember, we have to get off the exit soon. You know, Page is Google Maps right now, but the band isn't ready. So they kind of pull back to funk, and that goes through a lot of the rest of it.
My ears don't always pick up on Mike, but with this song, I love his bass. It's super bouncy. Like I have this visual of just a bouncy ball in my head, like thinking of his bass in it. And I just love the interplay between his bass and Page at the clav. Like it's just, again, my body just wants to move to it. It's just so fun and funky and completely not Simple.
Right, yeah. Well, it's fun you bring up Mike because at the very end, I think this jam is about 21 minutes or 20 or 22 minutes. At about 19 and a half, right before it ends, Mike completely drops out. He becomes conspicuous by his absence. You notice him because he's not there anymore. And the only phrase that I could think of is James Brown robot funk for the last 2 minutes of this jam. And I would like to say that I could throw a dartboard at this jam and say any part is my favorite, but these last 2 or 3 minutes might really be my favorite.
Because again, the evolution of this jam, it changes so much. You just said earlier, it's like 1 and 2 minute segments, but it's like something completely different every 1 or 2 minutes. And then towards the end, it's that slow little, I don't know how to describe it.
Well, at the very end of it, they do kind of run out of gas. And then, like they usually do, they move into Ghost.
Yeah, it's a solid transition, right? And I think it makes sense.
It does.
It doesn't feel recorded. You feel satisfaction, and it feels very, I think, seamless, that transition into Ghost. And just an excellent way to follow it up.
So, Rachel, thanks for being on here to tell us about your history as a writer, about your writing itself, to tell us about your personal life a little bit, which was really endearing and very informative to hear. And of course, Simple from August 29th, 2014 at Dick's. Before we end our conversation, can you remind our listeners once again where they can find you and a little bit about your writing, where to look out for it?
Yeah, thank you again. All right, so best way to find me right now is Instagram. Rachael Wesley Writes. It's RachaelWesley Writes. My writing has been published. You can find me on the website Tour Stories. I've been able to write some personal experiences, seeing different bands. I have an interview with Leftover Salmon's Andy Thorne on there. Some of my stories dealing with my mental health, you can find me on 20bellows.com and then Adelaide Literary Press. Hopefully, in the coming years, you might be able to see Second Set Chances coming out. And, if that is happening, you will certainly be hearing a lot about it. Again, thank you so much. This was so fun. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And this was just so fun. That's all I can say.
And that is it for today's conversation with Rachael Wesley. And we didn't just talk about music today. We talked about a lot. We talked about books and also music. So I had to do an extra thorough attendance bias fact check for today.
Attendance bias fact check.
Toward the first half of today's conversation, Rachel and I name-checked a lot of books and authors. So here's a rundown of a few that stood out. When I was talking about oral histories, the book about Saturday Night Live is called Live from New York, The Complete Uncensored History of Saturday Night Live as Told by Its Stars, Writers, and Guests. The ESPN book is called Those Guys Have All the Fun Inside the World of ESPN. Some of Rachel's favorites were Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, Wild by Cheryl Strayed, about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. She also name-checked Christopher Pike as an influence as a young adult fiction reader. Some more recent books that Rachel recommended were The Light Years by Chris Rush, Missoula by John Krakauer, and finally, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Moving on to Phish, Rachel's first show was during the 2003 Hampton return. Those shows were played on January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 2003. Rachel's show was January 2nd. That show featured the debuts of 46 Days, Round Room, Mexican Cousin, and Thunderhead when the Round Room album was brand new. Rachel mentioned that cacio e pepe is her favorite post-show snack, and I brought up a restaurant in Manhattan that serves the dish as their specialty. The restaurant is called Cacio de Pepe, and it is located on 2nd Avenue between 11th and 12th Street, just south of Union Square. There's also a location on the Upper East Side on York Avenue. However, I checked and they close at either 11 p.m. or midnight, depending on the night, so you may not be able to get a table there on time if you're leaving MSG after a show. The episode of Attendance Bias that covers July 27th, 2014, the Tweezer Fest from Merriweather Post Pavilion, was with Tim of Wook Plus. That episode originally aired on March 3rd, 2021. Also, during that summer 2014 tour, the Type 2 Wombat that I mentioned was played on July 18th of that year, and the Type 2 version of The Wedge was played 2 days later on July 20th, both at Northerly Island in Chicago. Both are probably the best versions of each song. That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Rachael Wesley for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. And you, if you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. And follow Attendance Bias on social media, mostly on Instagram and Twitter. If you reach out, say hi, I'll send you a free sticker. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.